Morrissey's bold claims, a shocking revelation at 66. At 66, Morrissey is still one of the most outspoken and controversial figures in music. Known for his witty lyrics, sharp tongue, and endless ability to spark conversation, he's made a name for himself not just with his music, but with his strong opinions. But recently, in an unexpected interview, Morrissey shocked fans and critics alike when he revealed the 6 bands he absolutely couldn't stand. And trust us, you won't believe the names he threw out there. For years, Morrissey has been known for his criticism of the mainstream music scene, often distancing himself from bands and trends he felt were too commercial. But these recent comments went far beyond just disliking a few pop songs or shaking his head at overhyped trends. No, Morrissey pulled no punches when listing the bands that he claims are the worst in music. Many were stunned, especially since some of the bands he listed had once been considered by some to be iconic. But to Morrissey, they were anything but that. He made it clear that these weren't just bad bands. These were the ones that, in his eyes, ruined the music scene. The shock waves were immediate. Fans of these groups were outraged, but at the same time, it gave Morrissey's longtime followers even more ammunition to rally behind his rebellious attitude. Let's dive into 6 bands that Morrissey named as the worst of the worst, and see why his harsh words might just make a lot of sense. The first band, a rivalry that runs deep. The first band that Morrissey dished out some serious hate for was none other than U2. Yes, Bono's legendary band, who are practically worshipped by millions around the world. For many, U2's anthemic hits are unforgettable, but to Morrissey, they represent everything that's wrong with mainstream success. U2, he said with a sneer, is a band that never knew the meaning of rebellion. He went on to describe how their massive popularity and overblown political messages made them more of a brand than a band. Morrissey has never been a fan of bands that sell their politics as merchandise, and U2's global reach, mixed with their ability to make money while preaching about social issues, was enough to turn him off. But the most interesting part of his critique was when he mentioned the band's infamous free album giveaway. In 2014, U2's album Songs of Innocence was automatically added to millions of iTunes accounts, much to the dismay of many. Morrissey took to social media to slam the move, calling it a capitalistic stunt and accusing U2 of trying to force their music onto people. For Morrissey, the idea that U2 could be this untouchable band that managed to market themselves with no real consequence was a slap in the face to the rebellious spirit of music. Fans of U2 have defended the band's actions, claiming that their music has inspired countless people and made real social change. But Morrissey wasn't buying it. To him, they were just another corporate machine, only wrapped in a shiny, socially conscious bow. The second band, a bitter rivalry. Next on Morrissey's hit list was Oasis, the Britpop giants whose swagger and in-your-face attitude defined the 90s. The rivalry between Morrissey and Oasis goes way back, and it's one that, over the years, has only intensified. When Liam and Noel Gallagher rose to fame, they were often compared to Morrissey's band, the Smiths. But unlike Morrissey's poetic introspection, Oasis was loud, brash, and unafraid to stir up controversy. Morrissey has made no secret of his disdain for Oasis. In the interview, he went so far as to call them musical hooligans and described their success as the triumph of style over substance. He blasted them for being nothing more than a cheap imitation of the Beatles, but without the artistic depth. Perhaps the most biting comment came when Morrissey mocked Liam Gallagher's vocal abilities, saying he sounds like he's got a mouthful of gravel. For Morrissey, Oasis represented everything he disliked about the commercialization of British rock: big egos, a cocky attitude, and a lack of intellectual depth. Despite Morrissey's harsh words, the Gallagher brothers have long since brushed off his criticism, with Noel famously saying, "Morrissey? He's just angry because he never got his day in the sun." But Morrissey's jabs at Oasis have always felt more like a personal vendetta than just musical rivalry. The animosity runs deep, and it seems like it will never die. The third band, a controversial figure in rock. If you thought Morrissey was done dropping bombs, think again. Next on his list was none other than Coldplay, one of the biggest bands of the 21st century. Coldplay's popularity has reached such heights that it's almost impossible to find someone who hasn't heard of them. But to Morrissey, they represent everything that's wrong with modern rock. Coldplay, he said, is a band that epitomizes everything I can't stand about pop music today. They're overly sentimental and devoid of substance. He criticized the band's entire approach to music, from their stadium-sized shows to their ability to constantly churn out chart-topping hits. In Morrissey's eyes, Coldplay isn't just a band. They're a calculated money-making machine that's lost touch with the authenticity of rock and roll. But Morrissey's critique of Coldplay didn't stop there. He also pointed out their use of celebrities to boost their image, particularly frontman Chris Martin's high-profile relationship with actress Gwyneth Paltrow. To Morrissey, it was just another example of a band trying to sell an image rather than focusing on the music itself. He argued that Coldplay's rise to the top had more to do with branding than it did with musical talent. Many Coldplay fans would argue that the band's success speaks for itself, that their anthemic ballads and emotional depth have struck a chord with millions of listeners worldwide. But Morrissey's point is that in a world where marketing often trumps the music itself, Coldplay represents the epitome of that trend. The fourth band, the controversy deepens. And now we come to the fourth band on Morrissey's list, The Killers, a band that rose to fame in the mid-2000s with their catchy hooks and glamorous rock star image. But while many love their anthems, Morrissey wasn't having any of it. He described The Killers as a plastic version of what rock should be. To Morrissey, they represented the commercialization of indie rock, a genre he once embraced but felt was now being watered down for mass consumption. He also criticized their image, calling them a band that looks like they walked out of a fashion magazine instead of a music scene. Morrissey's disdain for The Killers was clear. They were another band that he felt was more about style than substance. It was a criticism he'd leveled against countless artists over the years, but in the case of The Killers, it seemed personal. Perhaps it was because, like Oasis, they had taken the indie scene and turned it into something that Morrissey no longer recognized. Unlike all the other bands he'd criticized, Morrissey didn't hold back. He wasn't interested in sugarcoating anything. If he hated a band, he made it known. The final bands, wrapping up the list. As Morrissey continued to unveil the bands he couldn't stand, it became clear that he wasn't just picking random targets. Each one of these bands represented something to him. The loss of authenticity, the rise of commercialism, or the death of rebellion in music. Bands like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Foo Fighters, and even Radiohead made it onto his list, each for their own reasons. But what stood out most about Morrissey's rant was his constant refusal to back down. He wasn't just criticizing for the sake of it. He was making a statement about what music has become in the modern world. For Morrissey, music was always about rebellion, passion, and authenticity. In his eyes, the bands he named weren't just bad. They were symbols of everything that had gone wrong with the industry. Despite the backlash, Morrissey has remained unapologetic. His fans respect him for it, while his critics continue to accuse him of being bitter. But one thing's for sure, Morrissey's opinions always spark a conversation. In the world of music, that's something that can never be ignored.